Liquid Storm.
Today's episode is brought to you by Terry's Turpentine, offering natural solvents of unnatural quality. And for this month only, Terry's is offering 2-for-1 deals on selected home products. Tuesdays are twice as nice at Terry's. Episode 6.
Unbelievable.
We're halfway there, baby.
Mid-season, as they say in the industry. Factoids?
Yeah, I went and looked up a bunch of stuff about the number 6.
Can't wait.
Then I said, oh, wait a minute. And I went back and listened to episode 6 from last season of Killer Shipwrecks. And you literally went through all those same facts. I'm not going to do that. But I do have a bit of housekeeping. You and I got taken out to the woodshed a little bit by corporate. I could not tell from that voicemail whether it's already locked, it's already set that we have to do the mandatory diversity, equity, and inclusion retraining.
No, I think that was our warning.
Warning. Okay, good. Because what I was going to say is if she is requiring it, why don't we just wrap it in with the corporate retreat weekend? We could do part 3. We do the DEI.
Yeah, but it didn't come to that, or it hasn't come to that.
Well, we still have another episode to go. So
yeah, there's a long way to go. We could be knee deep in training, sensitivity training before this episode is out the door.
I believe it's called a re-education camp. And this year's re-education camp will probably be in Victorville again. I couldn't be more excited. This is my favorite. You are in charge today.
I am in charge, but before we get into the biography for today, which is going to be great, we did mention last week that we were going to call out a few of the geographical locations of our listeners. And so I want to take just a minute, I promise, just a minute, to read off a few of the places where we have at least 2 listeners.
Can't wait to hear. Where did people tune in from last week?
Let's start stateside, as they say, and say hello to our good friends in Somerville, South Carolina.
Hello, Somerville,
Hi, Somerville.
South Carolina. Thanks for joining us.
Let's stay in the South and go say hello to our friends in Denham Springs, Louisiana.
I'm fascinated by Louisiana.
Hello to LaGrange Park, Illinois.
Land of presidents, right?
Yes.
That's your home state.
Home state, indeed. Let's also say hello to, you won't believe this, Victorville, California.
Oh, man.
And we've been talking about Victorville.
Yeah. Victorville has a special place in my heart. I was a Cub newspaper reporter there. How long ago was that? 30 years ago? Unbelievably.
Yeah. Also want to say hello to Beauharnois, Quebec.
Love Quebec.
Pretty exciting. Anyways, those are some of the places where we have at least 2 listeners. Super excited to see that list growing and truly hope everyone continues to listen. Well, let's get to it. Today, I want to focus on someone who I believe is a pretty remarkable person. And she's not a household name, okay? So I don't think if I were to say her name, you would know who she is. If I said Margaret Rudkin, would that mean anything to you?
It would not mean a damn thing. Margaret Rudkin.
Yes.
That name is means nothing to me.
If I were to ask you, have you heard of goldfish crackers?
Oh, yeah.
Have you heard of Pepperidge Farm products?
Oh, yeah. Hello. Are you kidding me?
Margaret Fogarty Rudkin started Pepperidge Farm.
No, she didn't.
You're not going to believe this story of what an incredible person she is.
Wait, give me her middle name again.
Her maiden name is Margaret Fogarty, Fogarty. Last name is Rudkin, Rudkin.
Huh.
So she's not a household name, but she really should be.
Pepperidge Farm, is that the one that used to have the commercial where the guy had the accent, like on Pepperidge Farm?
Pepperidge Farm. Yeah, like, kind of older guy, glasses, and in some sort of carriage delivering bread.
Yeah. I get them mixed up. And then there was Orville Redenbacher with the popcorn. That was
also with white hair. Yeah.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, that really came later, like in the 70s and 80s. Prior to that, A, they didn't do a lot of TV advertising, and B, when they did, they starred Margaret Rudkin. She was in the ads in the 50s.
I really wish I had a bag of them right now already just talking about
that. They're freaking
What's
delicious.
your favorite flavor?
I'm seriously partial to the cheddar. It's a classic. I know some people like the more exotic.
I kind of liked the pretzel ones too.
Oh, I love the pretzel ones. Yeah, pretzel ones are great.
Or just like old school, like the plain one.
The plain original is a classic. It's something that you can always enjoy.
Yeah.
And that's not even the beginning of the tale as it relates to
Take us back to the beginning. Let's start at the beginning, as what's her name said, Julie Andrews.
So starting at the beginning, we'd be starting on September 14th of 1897. That is when Margaret Loretta Fogarty is born in Manhattan, New York City. Her parents were Joseph Fogarty, who was an Irish clerk, and Margaret Healy. She had red hair, green eyes. She had a Irish grandmother who lived with her. She grew up in this area called Tudor City, which is on the east side of Manhattan. At the turn of the 20th century, mainly brownstones, like 4-story brownstones, cobblestone streets.
Is this Lower East Side, Upper East Side, or we don't know?
It's right where the United Nations is today. So like the main building that looks over the East River where the United Nations is.
Cool.
That's where she grew up.
Yeah. Red hair and green eyes. She already sounds like a Spitfire.
Yeah. She's growing up. She talks about her childhood later on as being quite happy. She remembered playing on the street with her friends. Hot summer nights, they'd cool off by eating big ice cream cones, cost 5 cents.
Oh, man.
And then she said, quote, if we didn't have a nickel, we sucked a piece of ice dipped in sugar.
Man, those were the days. Yeah. Wouldn't it be cool to be able to just go back for 5 minutes and just sort of experience what it looked like back then? Unless, I don't know what the sewage situation was back then. Had they straightened all that out by then?
I don't know. When did indoor plumbing kind of come around? I don't feel like Chamber Potts and I would get along. Like, I don't want to do all that.
And then it's when she's in her teens, I think the Spanish flu comes through town, but...
Let's not turn this into a dark tale. We're talking about goldfish.
Yeah, red hair, green eyes.
Green eyes. So she remembers fruit carts coming through and the bells ringing and whistles being blown. And she always remembered the rhubarb man would come in the spring and the strawberry man in June, the grape man in September.
Idyllic.
So nice. And she even remembers the coconut man. He brought fresh coconut, which she said was, quote, hard on the teeth of a young one, but deliciously sweet and chewy. She then moves to Flushing, Queens when she's about 13 years old. She's a very strong student. In fact, she graduates valedictorian of her high school class in 1915.
So she's sharp. She's the top of the class.
She's top of the class, in particular known for being very good in math. She was given a job on Wall Street as a bookkeeper right after high school.
Really?
Worked for a brokerage firm called McClure, Jones & Company. She learned to keep books in a bank with the competition of men, she said, which was one of the finest backgrounds a woman could have for business.
Boy, how did she land that gig coming right out of high school as a girl?
She apparently was very good in finance.
Good with
She was a whiz. Yes.
Wow. So she's down there on Wall Street and right out of school, she's working at a bank.
Right out of school, using her talents in math. And she ends up meeting an executive there named Henry Albert Rudkin.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yes, that's the tip-off with the name, who obviously became her future husband.
Big age difference between them, or?
About a 12-year age difference. So not, criminal at the time, but definitely on the border of, is this appropriate?
Yeah. I mean, back then it was the norm.
I mean, it definitely sounds weird if you say, oh, your 10-year-old daughter is going out with a 22-year-old.
Yeah.
That would look weird.
Yeah. And then there's also the fact that they work at the same place. Basically, this wouldn't fly today, but it sounds like it worked out.
Worked out fine. He ended up doing very well. The brokerage firm did well. So they decided they wanted to leave the city. And so in 1926, they purchased a 125-acre farm in Fairfield, Connecticut, about 60 miles from the city.
Sounds awesome. Yeah, 125 acres.
I mean, can you imagine?
Yeah.
This was Fairfield, Connecticut in 1920s. Not a lot going on.
But was this going to be their main residence, or is this a vacation? Okay, this is their main residence.
This was their main residence. They decided they wanted to live this real country life. And when they found this property, one of the reasons they were attracted to it was the beautiful deciduous trees and the gorgeous coloring of the trees in autumn, which is when they saw the place.
Yeah, I always forget. Deciduous are the ones that drop their leaves?
Yeah, they sort of come back to life.
Yeah, okay.
Anyways, these beautiful trees. So they do a little research and they find out that the trees are sorghum species and they're known as pepperidge trees.
No.
Their genus is
Oh.
Nisa sylvitica, but they are known as pepperidge trees. So they decided to call their farm Pepperidge Farm.
Get out of town.
I'm not kidding.
I just sort of assumed that was, the name of a company, not a real thing. But okay.
They're living on this farm, and it's actually not as ideal as you'd think because they are city slickers. But remember, they're intelligent people. Unfortunately, they didn't have any background in how to do anything on a farm.
I was going to say, a steep learning curve there, probably making all kinds of silly mistakes at the very beginning.
Probably a comedy of errors. They did learn how to make sauerkraut and jams. They learned how to churn butter. They were able to raise and butcher their own livestock. But in true Margaret fashion, she also wrote letters to the Department of Agriculture to request pamphlets on, quote, killing, curing, and corning pork. So she was asking the federal government to send her information about all of this stuff.
Man, she's a striver. She's like you would expect from the valedictorian. She wants She wants the inside scoop. She wants to do it right.
They have some kids. Their youngest son, Mark, is born in 1929.
Great.
They're living on the farm. 29 is when things start to go a little bit haywire in the country.
I was going to say, they got out of Wall Street at just the right time.
Unfortunately, they were severely impacted during the Great Depression, but leaving that aside for a moment, their youngest son had severe allergies and severe asthma. It was a source of great stress in the family.
I bet.
In 1937, so he was about 8 years old, they went to a new doctor, and the doctor advised them to feed him a diet that featured fresh stone ground whole wheat.
Really?
And the reason was that at the time, the American diet was adjusting to highly processed white bread.
Man.
So this is like, Wonder Bread came out in the 20s, and it quickly became like, well, we're not going to bake bread anymore. We can buy it.
Yeah. What a catastrophe that was nutritionally for this country when we moved over to white bread. Do you think this stone ground wheat, was that good advice?
It's interesting. So, this is Margaret, who already we know she's going to take this pretty seriously.
Yeah.
Right? She's got kids. They need bread. She brought the same gusto and experimental zeal to bread baking, which, now she's about 40 years old and she's never made bread before. And so she's talking to this allergist about fresh stone ground wheat, which is very rich in vitamin B1. So she had never made a loaf. And she says, quote, "My first loaf should have been sent to the Smithsonian Institution as a sample of Stone Age bread, for it was hard as a rock and about 1 inch high. So I started over again."
Yeah.
And you can imagine she just kept at it.
I was going to say, it reminds me of the old adage about kids. They're like pancakes. You burn the first one. I guess it was the same with bread.
Maybe I was a bad cook because I feel like I did the same to both of my kids. But yeah.
The first loaf didn't come out great, but
No.
she's the type who's going to keep trying and she's going to perfect it.
Exactly.
I kind of imagine the family, the humor, trying to choke it down and,
Right.
hey, you'll get it.
It's pretty good. More butter, please.
I bet they got a little collie around the place and they break off a bit and see if the dog will eat it.
This is becoming a much more colorful story because now I'm picturing in the hearth. Do they have a hearth? And then there's a dog
They
in
gotta
there?
have a hearth. I mean, you got the hearth, you got the dog.
The only problem is the kid wheezing in the corner. And the problem is that it just breaks up the piece. You know what I mean? And I had asthma. So I'm not saying this as someone who is against kids with asthma or making fun of them. I never would. So Margaret is very focused because she's been given some hope by the doctor that this could improve Mark's condition. She said she developed an education in yeast. Like she learned everything there was to know about yeast. Then she figured out her recipe made with, all stone ground wheat flour, butter, milk, a little bit of honey and molasses. She tried to make it very tender. And so she first bought wheat berries and she milled them in a coffee grinder.
Are you kidding me?
And then later she found local grist mills, including a water-powered one in South Sudbury, Massachusetts. I think that's where Babe Ruth lived for a while.
Really?
Yeah, so she found this water-powered grist mill to stone grind this wheat.
I want to see all this stuff. First of all, I want to see wheat berries. I mean, my wife makes fun of me because I don't say, because I really lean heavy on the H in wheat. And, but I've never seen wheat berries. I want to see that. Second of all, I'd like to see, what the water-powered grist mill looks like and sounds like.
One thing I will say is that this is how nuanced her approach was to these ingredients. She wrote, in speaking about her commitment to the ingredients, she wrote, quote, "First, find some way to get sun-ripened, hard, high country wheat berries. Next, hunt for an old grist mill where they will grind your flour for you fresh the morning that you bake.
Wait, she wrote this down?
Yes, she wrote all of this down because she was experimenting.
She sounds a little obsessed with just like the bread part of it. Like, what about the rest of the meal? Is she putting the same effort into, cooking up the meat and preparing the salad? Like,
now you've uncovered next week's pot, because then we're going to go into the main course, which is usually a fish or a game meat. But for today, we're sticking to the breads. So anyways, she perfects this bread. As you can imagine, this is so Margaret. And this is very much thematic of her life, and why I found her biography so compelling is that at every step along the way in this person's life, she just overachieves and is undeterred.
Yeah.
She has perfected the bread, and she brings a loaf of this bread to her doctor, or to her son's doctor. And he loved it, and he recommended it to his other patients. And then he recommended it to other physicians.
Really?
For their patients.
Just as a generally healthy bread, or specifically for asthma purposes?
For both, because he felt it was healthier for this vitamin B1 to come through this bread than the processed breads. So already you're dealing with healthier kids.
It's amazing that white bread was already, doctors were realizing this isn't doing it.
It sounds like it was like the 70s, but it was the 20s.
Well, let's see. No, it's got to be the 30s, right? So if she's...
By now it's the 30s, but Wonder Bread came out in the 20s.
Incredible. So even during the Depression and stuff, they were able to keep the farm.
Perfect segue. So word is spreading locally about this bread, that Margaret's baking over there at Pepperidge Farm. So she's starting to sell the bread to some of the families. She was giving the bread to the families, but then she went to a local grocer in Fairfield and sold her very first loaf of bread. And she charged 25 cents. But guess what? The standard price for a loaf of bread at the time was 10 cents. So the grocer protested. He's like, what are you talking about? And her whole pitch was, well, I'm using premium ingredients and I need to cover the costs of those premium ingredients. Now, it was also, as you said, the Depression when this is going on. So the country's not out of the woods. So she's, selling pretty expensive bread.
But I feel like there's also something psychologically sometimes where when there's you're comparing a bunch of products in the same group and one is much more expensive, there is a thing sometimes like, yeah, maybe that is that much better. The other thing I picture about Margaret's bread, it comes out of the oven and dude, they're churning the butter there on the farm. They're making jams and stuff on the farm. Just lather that up with some butter and some jam. We have never recorded an episode where I was so hungry.
Some restaurant should play this pod in the background and people just keep ordering more bread, please. All right. So she's getting all these orders, right? These local grocers are ordering bread. She now has an assistant, but she is, as you mentioned, hand turning the mixing pail, like in her farmhouse kitchen. So it's still all happening in her kitchen.
When she has an assistant, is it the assistant helping with the making of the bread, or is the assistant helping with like getting it out to market?
Getting it out the door, taking the orders, doing, the clerical work.
Now, is this like a fun side project, or are they thinking like, okay, wait a minute, we could actually, as a family, make some money at this? Like,
you talked about the Depression. They started realizing they are making money. They moved their operations out of her home kitchen and into one of the abandoned horse stables on their property. Now, one thing to note is they bought this huge property, as we mentioned. During the Depression, they had to sell off a lot of their stuff. So they sold their car, 2 cars, I think, and they sold those.
Wait, but they didn't sell any of the land.
They did not.
I aspire to have a property where there's an abandoned horse stable on it. That just sounds exotic.
And that's where they put the kitchen. So they moved it into an abandoned horse stable. Eventually, they'll grow from there. But at that point in the horse stable, the dough was still hand kneaded. So they weren't using like machines of any kind. Still being done.
My other question is, what did an oven look like back then? Are they ovens that we would recognize, or is it a big like stone, like, fireplace looking thing?
Yeah, that I don't know. In this barn, I'm assuming it's one of those stone, like you put the big tray in, almost like the pizza stones.
And then you got the long, whatever that thing is, where you reach the rod in there and you bring it out. Oh my God. We'd have to pause so we can go eat a meal.
Okay, so she then approaches a grocery store in Stamford, Connecticut. It's the owner of a chain of stores at the time called Marshall's. He was very skeptical of this whole idea because he said, hey, you're very new to the grocery trade. She's over 40. You have the audacity to come in here and sell me bread for 25 cents a loaf. to cover your costs? Bread's 10 cents. Like, what are you
Yeah.
doing? As you'd expect, she said, just sample it. And when he tasted it, he bought all the loaves that she
No.
had. When she got home, he had called and asked her to make more bread. And she
Wow.
said, although at the time I knew nothing about manufacturing, about marketing, about pricing, or of making bread in quantities, she said, but when I got that phone call, Pepperidge Farm bread was born.
Oh my God. What year do we think that was roughly?
That
So if she's
was like
40,
around
so that's
39. I think it was
late
37.
30s. So what else is going on? We're headed toward World War II. We've gotten out of the
Right.
Depression, or we're mostly out of the Depression. They've managed to keep the farm.
They did. They kept the farm.
And so she gets that phone call. She realizes, like, okay, we're on to something.
Right. But as you mentioned, you had a couple external factors. For example, Henry, her husband, was badly injured in an accident.
No.
Yeah, it was a polo accident. So again, not that that should matter. but
Polo,
it's
like he was on a horse?
on a horse. Yeah, he's playing
Really?
polo. So yeah, so he obviously had the time.
I was gonna say, I mean, she's like churning the butter, and she's like going all over, all over.
But maybe he felt like he was in her way all the time. Like, do you want me to bring you more butter? No, I have enough butter. Okay. Can you, Henry, you got to leave the kitchen. Like maybe it was like that.
Yeah. I don't know. Polo doesn't smack of, being helpful by staying out of the way. That sounds like rich guy sport.
In any case, he was injured. He couldn't work. It was like 6 months. They weren't making a lot of money, and it was right in the thick of the
Can
depression.
he at least help out with the bread?
I don't know. He's injured. He might sample. I think he does a lot of sampling.
Puts on a lot of weight anyway.
But so there's a lot more pressure on her because now she's not just endeavoring to care for the health of her sick son, who's got the asthma, who needs the bread, and now she's building this business, but now the financial survival of her family is somewhat on her. So things are not great at the house. They are primarily making money by selling apples and turkeys. And that was when they were starting to launch their bread business. So now she's thinking, okay, I'm just going to keep going. I've got momentum. So she goes to New York. She goes to a very famous old food specialty shop called Charles & Company, which was directly across from Grand Central Station.
I just picture a guy with like the mustache, the waxed mustache and the apron and the prize cuts of meat back there and the scales.
It must smell nice.
Yeah.
She said she was frightened, to do this. This was like going to the big
Maggie?
dump.
Maggie's not frightened of anything.
She said she was frightened.
Okay.
So she goes in. The shop manager, of course, loves the bread.
Yeah, everybody
and he
does.
immediately compares it to the bread his mother baked.
But what in the world is she going to do? If this guy says yes, where's she going to be cooking all this bread?
So it's not like he's going to order thousands of loaves.
Okay.
So he ordered 24 loaves, and she baked them that night.
Oh my
and
God.
her husband brought them with him to work the next day.
This thing's exploding.
It's starting to explode with, like they say, the food literati in New York. They're like, everyone wants this bread. So then her life really changed. In December of 1939, Reader's Digest did a little story about her and the bread.
No, they didn't. In 39? Yes. But I mean, she's still a small operation for Reader's Digest. Is it just that it's unusual, her whole process, and that it's
a novelty. So Benjamin Sonnenberg, who was the man who suggested the Reader's Digest article, she decided to give him 5% of her business right then.
What?
Because she felt like he had such a huge
Hold on. Did he work at Reader's Digest, or he was the one who suggested
He just knew someone. Yeah, he recommended her.
She gives him 5% of the company?
Right then and there.
Oh, did that end up being a disastrous mistake, or did he prove helpful going forward?
He made millions from it, but it was no skin off her back.
5% is a big chunk.
A big chunk for one suggestion for one article. But the article did spark orders from all over the country.
Yeah, and it shows you who she was, that she would, she realized this guy has just done something that's going to make me a national brand now. And wow.
Yeah, and she recognized the impact. She quickly outgrew her space.
Yeah.
Right. She couldn't stay on the farm in any kind of abandoned barn.
Right. So what do you do?
So she rents a building in Norwalk, Connecticut in 1940. That's where she's going to have her commercial kitchen. And when she does, she is actually involved in designing the interior of the plant herself. So she positions all the equipment to support her particular manufacturing process.
And I wonder if it's hard for her because it sounded like back when she was first doing this, she was like real picky about the ingredients and where it comes from and, what's the firmness of the wheat berries. I wonder if she's able to keep doing that even when she scales up.
She does. I mean, that's her whole thing. And she attributes the success to the combination of quality and timing. The quality has to be there and everyone is ready for it. And so it's great timing.
I mean, you say everyone's ready for it. The funny thing is, it sounds like a story about the early 1970s and like the healthy food movement. You don't think of it happening in 1940.
Like organic this, organic that.
Yeah, that there's already like a market for, Then again, it's like good bread. People are not idiots. Like when you're comparing hers to Wonder Bread, it's like, yeah.
It's a world of difference. So you'll never guess what happens after the first year, but we're going to take a quick break. And on the other side of this spot, I believe we're hearing from Rapid City Laundry today.
Perfect.
We will find out what happens to Pepperidge Farm after she moves to Norwalk.
Can't wait.
Spring is here, and so is the mud. But when your favorite clothes get soiled, don't let your day be spoiled. Visit Rapid City Laundry and let their expertise in dry cleaning and laundry services wash your concerns away. A proud member of the International Fabric Care Institute, Rapid City Laundry now offers free pickup and delivery in Ashland Heights, Box Elder, and Somerset. Look for their famous neon sign at 312 West Main Street in downtown Rapid City. And if you mention Killer Biographies, you'll receive 20% off all fluff and fold services. Rapid City Laundry, keeping the Rapid Valley stain-free since 1928. All right. So we left off. She's moved to Norwalk.
Yeah, and I'm a little worried. You said you'll never guess what happened after her first year there. I hope it's not some major reversal of fortune, like a bankruptcy or something.
Not at all. She sells over 4,000 loaves per week by the end of that first year. So that's a lot of bread she's baking.
Yeah.
Within a decade, they'll be making 40,000 loaves an hour. So that just gives you an idea of this specialty design production plant that she created supported that level of growth.
Wait, that's still at the plant in Norwalk, where then 10 years into it, they're able to do 40,000 loaves in an hour?
Correct.
So it's a big place.
It's huge. It's a whole building.
Huh.
Growth was not entirely a straight trajectory. During World War II, there was a lot of wartime food rationing.
Yeah, that was my next question. I mean, people of that generation, it's like I mentioned the Spanish flu, that's in the 19-teens, and then there's the Great Depression, and then there's World War II. I mean, I'm sure there were a lot of businesses that either did not survive the Depression or did not survive the war because, Americans had to scale everything toward the war effort.
Yeah, that took away a lot of workforce and a lot of businesses.
Yeah.
During this time of food rationing, she decided to just limit production because for her, it was all about the integrity of the ingredients.
Oh.
So the 93 score grade AA dairy butter, fresh eggs, fresh whole milk, unsulfured molasses, and dark sweet honey.
Dark sweet honey. Wait, there's molasses and honey.
Yes.
Huh. And then this is the same recipe she had, from the get-go?
Yeah, that's what she developed in her garage or in her kitchen, which later moved to her garage, then the stable. Now this big plant that she designed.
So during the war, she says, that's fine, food rationing. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to produce less bread, but it's still going to be top shelf.
That's right. And so now this plant in Norwalk, by the end of the 40s, is baking over 50,000 loaves each week. It's definitely humming along. Like she's making a lot of money and growing her business. Her sons are growing up. They're doing really well. 2 of them joined the company. She's actually the star of all the TV commercials in the 1950s.
Man. Did they keep the farm in Fairfield? Okay.
They did.
Big workforce there in the late 40s? Must be.
Yeah.
She's cranking out that much
pretty
bread.
big. Oh, she's definitely cranking out a lot of bread.
And back then, is it called Pepperidge Farm?
Yeah. It's Pepperidge Farm Bread Company. Huh. During the 50s, she's starting to grow the company. And so she expanded into other products. And one of the first being frozen pastries. So she actually initiated an acquisition of a company called the Black Horse Pastry Company that made homemade frozen pastries that she really loved.
Yum.
Anyways, she does then, with this new lifestyle as being a successful businesswoman, go to Europe in the 1950s. And it is in Europe that she discovers these fancy chocolate cookies that she thought would be popular in the United States. So she right there bought the rights to produce and sell them. And she created Pepperidge Farm's distinctive line of European-style cookies, the Milano, the Bordeaux.
Yeah. Oh, man. Forgot about that. I was thinking of the Goldfish crackers, but I forgot about the Milano. Milano.
First came the
Oh,
cookies. She was also very into antique recipes and antique cookbooks. So she went around Europe and collected some really interesting cookbooks. She did discover who made the chocolate cookies. It was the Delacar Company. So she initiated discussions with this company, discussed obtaining the rights to their secret recipes. And so they did a deal together. She then imported a 150-foot cookie oven from Belgium. She also brought over a bunch of Belgian engineers and quality control people to oversee production.
this woman is amazing. Has she 86'd the husband by this point?
No,
They're still
they're still
together.
together.
I mean, this guy is like, oh my God. He had
I mean, a
no
lot of the
idea.
ones that she introduced in 1955 are still being made. The Brussels, the Bordeaux, the
I eat 'em
Milano.
all. I eat all of them.
Her whole endeavor was backed up by her insistence on high quality ingredients, which she believed would be a breakthrough for American cookie lovers because, again, they're eating a lot of processed
Yeah, I was going to say,
stuff.
when we were kids, the Pepperidge Farm was kind of like the fancy cookies. You know what I mean? It's like there was.
Yes. They had like a little, they came in a little doily or
Yeah,
something.
exactly. Like, there was Oreos and sort of mass market stuff. And
Salernos.
then Pepperidge Farm, you bust out if, like, the relatives are coming over, or there's,
Right. It's Nilla wafers and Salernos. Anyways, in
I love Nilla wafers too, though.
In 1958, she is on a trip again in Europe, and she's in Switzerland.
She's living the good life.
She's on business there. She discovers these tiny crackers that are shaped like goldfish.
Whoa, that's where she got it? Somebody was already doing it over there?
Someone was doing it
So
in
she's got a
Switzerland.
great eye.
Totally. And so she immediately bought the rights for the goldfish crack right then in Switzerland.
She is just a corporate shark, man.
Growing a
Yeah.
business. At this time, her innovations
Do you know, are they still producing bread, or by this point is it?
Very much a bread company still. Yes. That's their bread and butter, if you will.
I will.
Sorry. I had to go there. Her innovations weren't strictly in the culinary realm. She was encouraging women to work and she was hiring them, and she really liked the idea of women in the workplace. She was using her platform to promote women at work. And so she'd offer advice in magazines to other women to go into business for themselves.
And this was already in the 50s.
This was in the late 40s when she was doing a lot of this.
Wow.
Yeah. And then into the 50s. She focused on hiring housewives who, in the early days, like in the early 40s, she always was quoted as saying, look at what a bunch of women over 40 have done, because they were building this company. And she had 125 women working in her bread bakery in 1943. And she was quoted as saying, none of us had training or business experience. Most of us have children and home responsibilities, but we're running this business and making it pay. So it was very much a can-do attitude.
A lot of women, got the taste of the workplace during World War II. And then there was some dislocation when all the men came back. Some women were expected to go back to a traditional role. And they're like, wait a minute, I liked getting a paycheck. I liked doing stuff outside the house.
Well, exactly. And that's why she was known for offering flexible hours.
This woman is amazing.
So she said she had unmarried women that wanted to work early in the morning so that they could do their farm chores later in the day. Then she said we had married women with older children who could take shifts after school watching the other kids. So she liked to work then. And she said it's great preparation for running a business later in life, knowing how to buy and sell food, property, preventing waste, like knowing about cleanliness and routines and systems. And she was quoted in a newspaper in 1942 saying, like, I don't believe there's any job a woman can't do. They handle machines as well as men, and they're marvelous to work with. So again, she's promoting women within her own company, but she also is backing it up by working harder than anybody.
Henry is fully supportive of this whole what else can he do? She's raking in,
Yes, he's psyched. Well, and she is quoted as saying, I'm not going to ever retire. She says, quote, nobody's going to retire me to a rocking chair and shawl. She's a force. In 1960, she publishes the Margaret Rudkin Pepperidge Farm Cookbook, and it was the first cookbook to become a New York Times bestseller. Still available on Amazon today. It was an eclectic book with art from a Danish illustrator, and it was not divided by courses, but rather by life stages. So she had childhood and country life and Pepperidge Farm life. And then interestingly, she also interweaved sections from these antique cookbooks, which included vintage recipes from the 1475 Venetian cookbook. I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, but it's De Honesta Vol Pop. It translates to virtuous enjoyment and good health. And it was printed side by side with modern updates of the recipes. But here's my favorite part. the original cookbook from 1475 was written in Latin. So Rudkin had tracked down young professors to help translate it for her.
She really is a genius. I mean, and it shows that just to have that interest in the history of cooking and the history of cookbooks, and then to incorporate it into her own. I mean, she really is like, talk about bandwidth, not just running a business, not just acquiring new lines and, finding new products over in Europe and growing the business, but also then to have the first New York Times best-selling cookbook and to incorporate like this historical stuff into it as well.
Yeah, and she was known, like one of the reviews of her cookbook said, a remark often heard at the supermarket is anything put out by Pepperidge Farm is bound to be good. And this cookbook is up to that standard. They talk about her knack for turning this good taste into mass market appeal. She just was very good at it. And she did start speaking at, universities and at companies around the world. In 1960, she was invited by this very famous business school professor at Harvard, George Doriot.
And this is before old Julia Child.
Yes.
Rudkin. How have I never heard this woman's name? I did not realize that Pepperidge Farm was like, started.
It was really just this woman. She's the force behind Pepperidge Farm. So in 1960, she sold Pepperidge Farm, the brand, for $28 million to the Campbell Soup Company. Okay, so the deal would be worth about $287 million today.
Wow. Wait, so the brand we see nowadays is no longer owned by the family.
Correct.
It's owned by Campbell.
She sold it Campbell Soup. But when she sold it for $28 million, she stayed on as the head of Pepperidge Farm.
I bet she did.
She was running it, but she was the first woman to sit on the board of directors at Campbell Soup Company.
Oh, she gets a seat on the board.
Seat on the board. And if you see the photo, it's fantastic.
It's like 12 60-year-old fat white guys, yes. Bald white guys, and then the Spitfire.
Suffice it to say, the board was not overly diverse.
No.
The variance was probably in the exact age of the older white guys. Some seemed a little older than other guys.
So she sits on the board. Wait, what year did she sell? 1960? 61. And so then she sits on the Campbell Soup board.
She's on the board and she's running the company and, growing Pepperidge Farm. It's doing phenomenally well. And unfortunately, she gets breast cancer.
Oh,
She's still working though. So she has surgery, but she's still working. And then she has to retire in 1966 when she's like 68. And then she died the next year in 1967 at age 69 from breast cancer.
Unbelievable. She died at 16. It's amazing how much she packed into 69 years of life. Dies at 69.
She went from teaching herself at age 40 to bake bread for her 3 kids to a titan of American industry. And one of the best obituaries said Mrs. Rudkin is remembered as dynamic, warm-hearted, imaginative, witty, and inspiring. And I felt like that really does capture probably how people related to her.
Oh, man. One of the things I love about doing these is you get to know the person and you really, like, I'm feeling sad about, what an incredibly dynamic woman. And she should have lived another 30 years,
When she passed away, the Pepperidge Farm Company had 5 modern plants around the country, and she employed over 2,300 people. And much later, Campbell Soup Company, at the 50th anniversary of the deal, acknowledged that it had proven to be the most strategic acquisition our company has ever made.
Wow.
To give you a few fun stats, Pepperidge Farm now sells about 188 billion individual goldfish crackers.
Well, I was going to say, normally what we say as we're moving toward the end of the episode is, you know what I'm going to do as soon as we sign off? I'm going to, look up the videos, look at the photos. I'm headed right over to the grocery store. I'm going to go old school and just buy up all the different Pepperidge Farm products and just treat myself.
Those crackers are in 1 in 3 American
households. I haven't had one of those crackers in years.
She impacted American culture. Pepperidge Farm bread was on Apollo 13.
Unbelievable.
In 1961, when she sold Pepperidge Farm, they were doing about $22 million worth of sales per year. 50 years later, they were doing $1.3 billion. And they rank in the top 2% of brand equity worldwide. worldwide.
Unbelievable.
I mean, this is what she created. So, quick side note about her son, Mark, who had the asthma. He eventually became a gardener and he moved to France. And in 1992, he was selected by the French government to restore the gardens at the 17th century Palais Royal, where Louis XIV, among many other members of French aristocracy, once lived.
Why in the world would they pick some American to do that?
Not only is he American, it says Rudkin had no formal training as a horticulturist.
I mean, that just sounds like a bad hire right there.
He turned for inspiration to the Connecticut farm where he grew up, the one famed for the colorful foliage of its pepperidge trees. He says, "We were all very plant conscious. My father had a vast knowledge of trees and shrubs, and my mother did the flower garden. So I was just brought up in that element."
My mother did the flower garden,
She
and she also built a billion-dollar business.
Why do you think you're living so nicely in France?
That's insane that the French government put him in charge of it.
Yeah.
Although, if he's a chip off the old block, he probably was a genius in his own right.
But it is, interesting when you think of Pepperidge Farm. If you were to ask the average person, you would think it was created by a corporation or like
absolutely.
And then you think, oh well, those brands were. Everyone was in a room and everyone was throwing out ideas.
Madison Avenue. To me, it's like exactly.
How is she not the most famous woman in America? Really a pioneer. She was born in 1897.
Would have been a good president. Would have been a first good female president for America.
Yeah.
25 cents for that loaf. God, I'd kill to have one of those early loaves just to taste what it tasted like.
From right in the kitchen with the hearth.
I'm going to the grocery store right afterwards. I'm gonna get the crackers. I'm gonna get the cookies. I'm gonna look for the bread.
I truly feel like everyone, if you know who created McDonald's, like it's some guy named McDonald or Ray Kroc, or everyone should know Margaret Rudkin.
Yeah, this is a great episode. This is why we do what we do. Because it's one thing if it's like, okay, Pocahontas, right. People have a general idea, right. But this is like, I never heard of this woman, and we should all know about her. Yeah,
like there should Margaret be books, Rudkin. Or this should be a great movie, as you said.
Even after, probably not, given that she had sold it. Mm-hmm. I was going to say after she died, was the family involved at all?
2 of the sons ended up being either CEOs or senior executives. So yes, and the husband. Incidentally, he left his job and left Wall Street to become head of like finance and marketing at Pepperidge Farm. So he did work there.
And she put it in his contract. Well, no more polo, right?
There's a no polo clause.
There was a no polo clause. Yeah. So that makes sense.
Her husband died actually the year before her.
Oh,
so it was kind of sad.
Then again, he was 12 years older.
He was 12 years older.
I wonder if that farm in Fairfield, Connecticut stayed in the family or it eventually got sold to some billionaire from the city. Hey, we have a mutual friend who lives in Connecticut.
Yes.
We could see if, whether there's still a family farm there in Fairfield. But then also, it feels like they should have made it a historic monument in Norwalk, Connecticut, like the birthplace. Of Pepperidge Farms, and still just a massive brand. Those numbers you quoted, I mean,
but she's just figuring it out as she goes. Like she has no idea.
She did it at
just taking the orders. 40 years old, yes.
Between the age of 40 and then when she dies at 29, just in 29 years, she creates this.
She moved to the farm. She's writing the government like, "Hey, how do I butcher my hog?" Like what? She's from Manhattan.
Well, I don't know. I guess, you'd have to read the cookbook. Maybe she also had a passion for other kinds of cooking, but it does seem like there was something about the baking that she was really drawn to the baking and getting it just right.
They credit her grandmother for that. Now, There's not a lot of documentation, but they do say that she learned baking from her Irish grandmother.
I mean, think of the thousands of lives she impacted by employing women and telling women, you should be working, and telling them, okay, it's better for you to work in the morning. Okay, we'll make it work.
1950. And the other thing is, think of how the company started. It started because she wanted to bake a bread that her son could eat without getting sick. So she wasn't even like, I have to figure out a business. Like it all just sort of
happened organically. I don't know. I guess there's all different creation stories for successful businesses, but it does feel like one that is born of a genuine need and interest and grows organically like that is going to do better.
And you're a smart person with a great character.
Not just smart, but I mean, incredible perseverance. And then also the freaking
incredible.
And the chutzpah to say, and it's going to sell for 25 cents, especially to go into Manhattan to,
Right.
a well-established specialty store and say, no, yeah, it's going to be 25 cents. Like, so
Yeah.
she was not just smart. I mean, she was gutsy. She was strong. She was a
Well,
pioneer.
she had
Yeah.
business acumen. She had it all. Like, it's one of those things.
Yeah. And just like living her best life, like going to Europe, figuring out things that caught her attention there, buying the rights
Yeah.
to the goldfish crackers, buying the rights to the fancy cookies.
Right. She wasn't on the beach like having a Mai Tai. She was like literally negotiating to like license
Yeah, and
Belgian
it's
cookies.
not like patently obvious that that's going to do well, because there are some people who are like, well, no, if you look at the cookies,
You're going to spend
yeah,
more
you
money
look at
for
the cookies that are
Yeah.
selling in America, it's like, no, if I, a lot of people would say if I want to make, millions of dollars, then it's going to be some, more of a down market thing. But to say, no, let's bring to America, the finest, like the fancy ones.
So are you teasing next week's episode?
I can tease. Let's see, how would I relate it to this one? I do know who I'm going to profile in our next episode, and it's, boy, it could not be a more different story from Margaret Rudkin. We're going to go into a whole different historical time period, a whole different country, and an entirely different personality from Margaret.
Right, I'm trying to think of the exact opposite of Margaret. Like, is it just some like angry young boy who's?
There's an antisocial aspect to it, but I mean, a pioneer in his own right. I will say it's a male, and pioneer in his own right, but more down the antisocial line. I have fallen in love with Margaret Rudkin.
Yeah, she's someone I wish I could have met. Like, she's someone that she would be like transformative to meet. Like, she probably had a very infectious personality.
I wish she could have lived another 20 years. I wish she could have been a voice as we moved into the 70s. I don't know where you plucked this one out of, but I never heard this woman's name. She's an incredible American story, not just American, just a great story, period. And I want to see pictures of her through the years. I want to see the young Spitfire. I want to see her when just opened up the plant in Norwalk. And then, but I really can't wait to see her on the board with all the old crusty white guys.
Oh my gosh. You will crack up. You will crack up. I mean, it's like a Photoshop. Like, wait, where did
Margaret freaking Rudkin. Great pick.
Doctor, we will take a mid-season break. We will be back after the break. You will be presenting. It's going to be someone who is the opposite of Margaret.
Now listen, when you say mid-season break, we're talking a couple weeks?
Couple weeks, yeah.
Couple weeks.
It'll give everyone a chance to re-listen to some of the great biographies in this first half of the season. So I'm going to play our outro music. We will take a break, and then we'll be back in 2 weeks.
Sounds good.